So I don't know about all of you, but I personally at times, whether I'm running a TTRPG or playing in one, find world travel a little bit boring. And sometimes just downright a slog or, pun intended, a detour to a road of boredom. But in Fabula Ultima, they have made a fantastic rule set that allows quick travel and quick results if you choose to in this game. In this episode of How to Fabula Ultima, we're going to cover traveling and journeys. Let's check it out. And as always, before we get started, I want to just give a quick shout out to those people that are giving me a little bit of love, giving me their views, subscribing to my channel. And if you haven't yet, please hit like, hit subscribe, and it really helps the analytics of my channel and people getting a viewership of this. I know there's so many people in the TTRPG world, and there's so many people in the JRPG world that are just dying to know about the blend of this game. And we being in this niche, I think it's our responsibility to show that there's other fun games outside the big games like D&D and Pathfinder that are a little more rules light, intro friendly, and really scratch the itch for both the TTRPG and the JRPG realm. So as I say that, I'm also going to conduct a couple of experimental videos soon where I'm going to try to do some live videos where I'm going to do the process of creating a character from scratch to show how that works. And then if I get good reception on that, I'm going to do the same thing with an NPC, maybe make a monster to show that's nothing to really be afraid of and how the process of it works. Now, the bestiary is coming out in 2026, and I do think that's going to do a lot to help give scenarios, but I don't think it's really that challenging, and I look forward to showing them. So that being said, let's get back to the topic of journey and traveling. So the first important thing when it comes to journeying and traveling in Fabula Ultima is making sure you have a world to travel. And this starts at the beginning of your sessions, the session 0, as you're developing this world, developing the characters, everything that comes with starting this game in Fabula Ultima. And that is usually achieved by using a map sheet of some sort. Fabula Ultima has the PDF version on their website. You can download and draw your own conceptualized map that you can play at your table. I personally use Foundry VTT for my Fabula Ultima games, so I basically just import my map into that, and I'm going to be showing some scenarios shortly on that. But when it comes to the actual world physically being built and you have this landscaped out, the GM then basically uses either hexes or squares, or I guess really could be whatever type of unit size, to develop what is considered one travel day. And that is determined by foot. There's other elements, of course, you can use ships, horses, chocobos, whatever your world has in it, but it's important to understand what the unit number is as far as a daily travel on foot. So now you and your players have a little bit of your map sheet established, and there's a visualization for both of you. And actually, real quick, it's worth noting, it's okay to have an incomplete map. There's too much in this game of Fabula Ultima that is built off collaborative narrative. It is not the responsibility of the GM to come up with the entire world. They may come up with 60%, 80%, whatever, but the GM has to be equally responsible to allow the players to inject creativity into the game. And that's going to be performed by Fabula Points. And the GMs are going to probably just throw things at the players when something seems fun. That being said, when they traverse out to the first day of their travel, they're going to enter one of their, whatever the unit you create, the hex, the square on the map, and the GM is going to then conduct what is called a threat level. And that is going to be determined here shortly in a chart I'm going to show that shows different variables of what is conditional to the area. Once that is established, the player, or at least I have a player, roll one die in reflection to the threat level. If the player rolls a 6 or higher, it's considered a danger. Something is going to happen, whether it's an actual conflict, battle, or maybe there's a hazardous situation they're going to have to work their way through with checks. Either way, it's normally a negative. If they roll a 1, they get a discovery, which is usually something very good. It could be something like a traveling merchant shows up to restore IP points on the road. It could be a replenishing pool. It can maybe be a solution to the travel, to expedite the travel time by some manner. There's a lot of ways to approach it. Then in between that 1 and 6, if that is rolled, which is a 2, 3, 4, or 5, nothing happens. You go to the next travel day. And as you travel, you might see different threat levels. So when it comes to determining the threat level, we're going to use this handy dandy chart provided by the core rulebook that shows the sample areas that can be defined a threat level from very low at a D6 to very high all the way to a D20. And when I go back to, I say, remember, 6 or higher equals a danger. You can see the higher the die, the higher the threat, and the more likely you're going to roll a 6 or higher for a danger to occur. So looking at some of the sample areas, a low threat would be a village or maybe a guarded city where there's not a lot of problems. Maybe you're just venturing for the first time and looking around for certain things. To be perfectly honest, once you get into a village, for me, I'm not probably going to do much in the traversing chart, but either way, it's pretty aimed for you to not fail in most regards. I mean, we have a 1 in 5 chance for that happening. Still doesn't mean it can't happen. Then we go over to the low, which turns into prairies and patrolled roads. And of course, that's usually meaning in a conflict of patrol, not in your favor. But I guess you could also say that that's what's keeping it limited versus the chaos on the outskirts of town. But either way, that's determined by a D8, and you're seeing the marginal increase as we go. Then we get to forests, hills, rivers to a D10. Vast forests, mountains, open sea, swamps to a D12, and that's when we get to deserts and frozen waste, or maybe jungles or volcanoes that'll go into D20. And as you can see, that is your ground basis to really start to determine what your players are getting into. But of course, those are just determined ventures, what you might see on the map. There also is injections like weather, or maybe there's some bandits that might also be increasing the scenario. Now, before we go to my visual example on traversing the world map, there's 2 more important things I want to go over very quickly. And the first one is when establishing how many days it's going to take to travel from one point to another, never use a half scheme of a day. Always round up. So if you're determining that it's going to take 2.5 days to get to a destination, always round up, make it 3. Also, there's also worth considering that you're not always going to have a set date because they might be traversing into unknown areas. So I would keep it vague, make it 3 to 5, 5 to 7 if you're not sure. But either way, when they end a day, make sure it's a full day and it's not a half. The second is when it comes to traversing a certain area, there might be more than one threat in the area. So you might have the outskirts of a village and there's prairies that are like a D8 in difficulty, but you eventually hit the hills or the entry of a forest that makes it a higher difficulty of a D10. So when that happens, it's kind of like rounding up. Always take the higher threat. So here is my visual example of my map sheet that I use in Foundry VTT. I use the Project FU game system that has been kept up significantly with awesome contributors and module creators that made this game so much easier to display online, which is essential to me because all of my players are in Canada and I'm from Oklahoma. There's no logistical sensibility of us ever playing. So it's great for me to have this for visual sake, and it just is fun to continue to grow in on the map. And if you actually look at some of the locations here, you'll notice that there is familiar names if you've played the Press Start module. And that's because we just continued on our Press Start module because we loved it so much. We didn't actually do a world building. And when this game ends, we'll probably do that with a new style and a new setting. But in the meantime, we're just going to keep going. So I look at this map. And first off, I kind of just drew out a land plot and left it at that. Then I made the grid, and then I got my players together and said, all right, let's start plotting where your character players are from. We already had them pre-generated, so we know De Novo down here. If you've played the Press Start, it is the location where the heir of De Novo, Blair Claremont, lives. Then we have up to the northeast here in this purple gridded area, or highlighted area, is Armorica, which is one of the important locations for the Press Start module for the character Levine Fallbright, but she is no longer represented by a player, so she is not being used at this time. I will probably use her for NPC purposes, but Armorica has significant narrative in our game, so there it stays. Now, down below, I have Stormkeep, which is the homestead of the former Skyrider captain, Cassandra. And there's actually a lot of stuff going on right there. It's a lot of tension. That's where our current game is set it at, and a lot of tension is built. Then we have the town of Pemble. which is the location where the boy inventor who had lost an arm, Edgar, is from. Now, you've noticed kind of everything has been put not too far away on the big map. And if I scale out, there's a lot of incomplete area. And as I said earlier, that's okay. And that will continue to build. If you notice right here, I have Targus. This is where actually the main antagonist, the Elonian Empire, centralize, but we don't really have any definitive explanation of how it's separated or anything yet, because we haven't quite gotten there. Everything has been focused all in the Denova Stormkeep area so far in our game. But that being said, one thing we have added was with a new player that came into our game by the name of Caspian. He is a entropist. He comes from the magical I wouldn't say kingdom, but isolated wizard towers where a lot of arcane residual magic is. It's a place called Damascus. And there's a lot of mystery to that at the moment, and not much is known as he kind of just randomly teleported to the party. But going back to the actual world traversing, we're going to just use Edgar as our example. He's back, and he's getting a little homesick outside of Denova. You see, Pemble, as a village from Denova, doesn't seem to be too far away. Now, we look at the grids that I've got right here placed upon, and this is where I really like Foundry because I can set the grids to represent any variable of distance, and I just have the grid set to days. So let's just say Edgar wants to keep traveling, and he gets to 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and he's trying to make as much of a safe journey as possible. I have made him to the village of Pemble. If you see it counts, I have 12 days of travel. Now, normally, I will probably map that out later to see where that's going to take, or we'll just kind of play it by ear. But you'll notice I used all the safe areas splitted in between traveling through. Most of this was uncontested location, where if we were going every day, he was going to travel up one, or the party was going to travel up one. Since this is an area, it's kind of the outskirts, there's not a lot to it. There's maybe some prairie. I still probably would use a D6. I wouldn't say I'd say it's more farmlands to Denova. So I would have him roll a D6 to see what is going to be the result. So they would have him roll it. Let's see what it pops up on the table. We got a 3. So in this scenario, a 3 is within the range of the 1 to 6, and so therefore nothing happens. So we'll go into another area. But before, let's just say for the sake of it, he doesn't cut in early more internally into the less invasive, even though you probably would want that. We're going to go into this location to the second day. Now, if you notice in my map planting, I have a little bit of forestry. So this is where I was talking about that you might find yourselves in 2 different conflict levels. You have a D8 in the prairie, some of the open lands that might be a D8, but you're touching the outskirts of the forest and having to travel in just a bit. This is a D10. So now I'm going to have, I don't do it. I let the players roll it, but they will roll a D10 to see what happens. In this section, they got a 5. They're safe again. And I'm hoping you're seeing this. I'm going to keep moving in. We're going to do just another D10 to see what happens, even though I know I didn't really path exactly the way I counted it. So far, so good. I mean, you're seeing how quickly this is moving in the game. They've already made 4 days, or are on their 4th day of travel. They're still touching forest. I'm going to do a D10 again. And wow, the travel to Pemble may not be as bad as they expect. We're going to go D10 again. My players would be overjoyed knowing that this is going to happen so easily. Now, I'm going to take them out of the woods and make it a D8 because it's not so much they're in the pathway in between. Roll a D8. And hey, look, I finally rolled an 8, which is over a 6, which equals a conflict, to which now I have a decision to make. Am I going to make this a battle? Now, normally I would try to see how this game is paced. If the last session they already had a battle, I'm probably not going to jump into another battle just yet, especially if I know something might be happening in Pemble to shock them with. So what I would do is I would go into the examples of dangers that I'm going to post right here on the screen, and it talks about narrating certain things. Maybe there's some bandits that are on the outskirts of this area. And now I'm going to make this more of a challenge for skill checks. I'm going to probably have the players do a group check and let someone be the leader and then see what the difficulty level is. If they beat it, they move on to the next roll for the next day. If they don't, though, if they fail, I'm going to probably do one of two things. Also using a chart, I'm going to see if it's going to give damage, or maybe I'm going to give them conditions of days. Maybe they got all knocked in the back of the head, but they were able to escape. And now they deal with the days effect. So you can see how quickly I've just ran through this, even though it took a little bit of a journey to find a result of danger. I've been talking for maybe 5 minutes on this scenario, and they've already traveled 5 days before something's happened. So you can already see how quick this is to get from landmass travel just by foot. Now, one other thing I want to also highlight in my game, I'm going to bump Edgar out of here real quick. I'm going to move over here. You notice this guy right here. And if you play JRPGs, you probably recognize this as a chocobo. Yes, my players decided to use a Fabula point to say chocobos existed in this game and to award that injection. Anyone who's played Final Fantasy 4 or 6, and maybe a few others, 7, 9, that have those chocobo forests that are just randomly placed in the woods, I have that mapped there. So technically, if they wanted to, they could have traveled over to the chocobo area and maybe been able to travel significantly quicker. I would lower the threat levels. This is me being creative. That's not in the rule book exactly, but it's your design to give injections whether something might be less threatening or more threatening in the scenario. So that being said, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of my visual of my map sheet and you understand how pretty easy it is to move through the world that you're building. Now, when I'm ending my videos, I'm always hoping when it comes to it, I've articulated the topic at hand. And the reason is I'm not trying to plagiarize the core rulebook or give you no reason to read it. In fact, it's the exact opposite. There's so many awesome scenarios in pretty much any description of the rules or whatever that is placed in this book to help you understand. What I'm trying to do is encourage you to read this because this game is awesome. And I think it's probably one of the best games to present to people that are just new to TTRPGs. There's not a lot of complexities. It may seem like it, but really you can play this game very quickly. And the traveling and journey rule system is really a good scenario of that. It's one die to roll, and basically each day that occurs, you have either an awesome situation, a bad situation, or more likely than not, bending on the threat level, nothing. But that allows things to happen very quickly. And if there is a conflict, you get to choose as a GM if it's going to be a battle, if you feel that's necessary, or create some sort of narrative to allow them to understand what they're dealing with, have them do some skill checks, and see if that results in a failure. If it does, hit them with conditions, hit them with damage. Give them reason to spend IP points to camp out at night in their magical tents, use potions, use elixirs, use remedies, whatever the case. But when it comes down to it, it is all about the narrative and the injection of you understanding this doesn't take much and it really doesn't require much to create fun. So that being said, please, as always, like, subscribe, and let's see what happens next on How To Fabula Ultima.